Here we go. Welcome to those joining. 7:30 on the dot. Perfect start time. So you'll see two sections for communicating with us, the panelists. One is a chat section. The chat says like, hey, what's up? QA is a section only for profound questions. If you don't have profound question, do not put it in there. Just put it in the chat if you're not sure. Just kidding, but the panelists will be able to see the questions, and if they want to respond to any of them in written form, they could as well, those questions. So we'll just wait as people join. I know there was some confusion on the time. Some thought it was 7, some thought it was 7:30. So we'll just give it a couple minutes, and Ryan, you'll do your thing in the background if possible. I am curious, for those joining, where they are joining from. It helps not to feel like I'm talking to a camera and there's an actual person on the other end. So if you just type in the chat section where you guys are joining from, Florida, New York City, welcome.
Big surprise.
Florida, Staten Island, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Catskill, Seattle, Jerusalem. Someone up late for this. Mexico, New Jersey, Chicago, super cool. New York, Arizona, Miami, welcome. Welcome.
Hi, Zoe.
What do we got?
I was just saying hi to someone I recognized.
Oh, cool. Nice.
It's a funny format. This doesn't exist in the real world that I can think of, that like we're talking and we know that we're talking to people, but we can't see the people and like can't really get this. Like, I'm trying to imagine a real world, real life situation that would imitate this, and I can't really.
This is new.
Nice, Rita.
This is new for all of us. I don't know if you saw this Mother's Day video that's going around where someone's doing an interview and they say, you got to be on your feet all day and you got to do this and you got to do that. And they start the interview with, have you ever done this before an interview over a webcam? And I was like, wow, you just gave it away. This was made way before coronavirus. So, sort of like talking to God. All right, so we'll jump in. And, in thinking about the topics that we put out there for these webinars, it's usually a real life event. Not usually, it's always a real life event that prompts me to thinking something and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool to have a discussion around that? And instead of just having the discussion privately, we hit the record button and hit the live stream button and hope a couple people benefit from it as well. So as I've spoken a lot about, I'm in recovery from addiction, and part of that process is to help others who are recovering from addiction. So in the early days of quarantine, someone reached out to me saying he's struggling, and he asked if I would be willing to help him out with his sex addiction. So we started talking, and every few days or once a week we get on the phone. And one of the things I asked him to do, I said, listen, I don't know you that well. We've spoken a couple of times, but why don't you just write out your whole story for me? It's like, well, how long should it be? I said, as long as you want, just write it out. Just tell me about your childhood, especially the things that led up to the addiction. Talk to me about the addiction. What happened now that you've decided to change course and, stop doing those things. And a few days later, he messaged me and he's like, damn, that felt so good. Felt freaking amazing. And I haven't even I didn't read it yet. I didn't give him comments on it. I didn't do anything. And that evening I read it and I gave him some comments on it. And it was really cool to get to know someone's story in that way. We normally never do that, even people we know for a long time, but the addiction recovery space allows for types of requests you couldn't ask someone in normal life. Hey, can you write your whole life story and then we'll talk? So after we spoke, I said, what would be cool would be to share it in a meeting. See if your meeting would let you, pick out the parts of the story that you'd want to say. And for 15 to 20 minutes, tell that story to others. And one of the cool things about that format is, the response you're going to get is a positive one, right? It creates a space that allows for kind of almost obligate someone to a response that's going to be helpful and beneficial. And then after that, he was doubly excited, like, wow, what a relief. I feel like I got so much off my chest. And as I was talking to him, he'd been in therapy for years. He'd been working a program with others, and there just seemed to be this massive relief. And I said, wow, I've had that same experience too. And in recovery, but also out of recovery. The one example that comes to mind the most is when I was working with Jewish Community Watch, combating child sex abuse. So we were known for exposing those who abused victims. I mean, that was our calling card. And one of those people we exposed, a gentleman by the name of Levi Moskowitz, a few weeks after he was exposed, committed suicide. And that, Rosh probably remembers this because I was talking to him a lot about it. And there was just this cocktail of emotions that I didn't know what to do with. I didn't have anywhere to place it. It just felt like it was swirling inside me. It felt wildly uncomfortable. And after a few days, somewhat sleepless and really restless the whole time, I sat down and wrote an article, which I ended up publishing online on Times of Israel. But as soon as I finished the article, there was something that just felt like a release that happened. And although there was still pain, there was a certain clarity that came from putting the words on paper. And the fact that it was published afterwards and I got different feedback, I got a lot of positive feedback from his family, but that was secondary to just getting all my thoughts out onto a piece of paper. And then there are other examples, which I'll talk to as well. Rosh Lowe's my speaking coach, and I was shy and afraid of the stage and afraid of everything else. And he trained me for that. And that too, putting my story out in that way was also very cathartic. But when I thought about it, it wasn't just the stage experience that was cathartic, not standing up in front of a room and talking, but also the process on working through a story. I was reading a book and, kind of preparation for this called Expressive Writing That Heals. And James Pennebaker is the author. And he brings a lot of studies. It's very science-based. I understand what works and what doesn't. And in connecting to stories, one of the things he said is that when they've analyzed writings of people who were helped by it, when they found story words like because, therefore, things that suggest some sort of connection, cause or effect, words that had that, people who had those words in their writing ended up reporting a more positive benefit from the writing as well. And that's something that I saw in working the story through often with Rosh, some very painful stories in preparation for talk. So I thought it'd be really cool to bring this group of people together, slightly different skill sets, but all in the idea of expression, right? Elad is a writer, Elad Nehorai, if you guys want to say hello to those here.
Hi, Elad, should I introduce myself or you taking care of it?
I don't want to put you on the spot too much.
Sure. No, my name is Elad Nehorai. Some of you might know me from Pop Chassid. It was a blog I ran. Hevria, as was mentioned. And now I'm also doing a lot of freelance writing. And, from the beginning, I remember actually when I first started writing Pop Chassid, the name of Pop Chassid came about because it had nothing to do with my actual writing that ended up kind of being the writing that I stuck with. It was because I was really interested in combining Chassidus and movies. So that was how Pop Chassid came about. And I remember speaking to my wife right before we left Israel. We were about to leave for work. I was coming to New York. I remember being like, there's things I need to get off my chest. I need to be more raw. I need to be more real. I'm so sick of writing in this certain format. And I've been writing also for Chabad.org, and I loved writing for them, but it was very, it was a certain kind of writing that wasn't, for me at least, that I was doing. It wasn't from the heart in a deep way. And so when I got to New York, I just started writing really raw stuff, and all of a sudden my writing transformed. And it was very much like the writing that you described. That's why I started thinking about it. It's because I realized—
Very much like the writing that what?
The writing that you mentioned, that it
right.
was very— it reminded me of that, the because and the therefore and all these things. And I think that that way of writing, I realized had this dual effect of, number one, healing, things that I was going through or helping me get the words around them, and also giving them to others, like where other people would start to email me and be like, I went through this exact thing, or you found the words for something I was feeling. And that to me was so magical. I got very much addicted to it in a very in a good sense, addicted to it.
I think I read an article where you spoke about that when you were writing for a website, Chabad.org, you weren't writing in your own voice. And the book I mentioned, Expressive Writing, it gives 4 elements of writing that they found that works to heal, right? We're talking about writing that helps to heal trauma, unprocessed emotions. And one of the 4 is writing in one's own voice. And I think I saw that in an article of yours that you mentioned that was a transition when you went from writing about ideas that you're communicating to writing in your own voice about how these things are affecting you.
Yeah, we have, I think, a bias in our culture. I don't know if it's as strong now, but definitely when I was writing at the time, there's a bias in our culture, both secular and religious, where there's this idea that speaking about ideas is a higher form of expression, and speaking about personal things or speaking about, I guess, unserious things, which would be like, like a micro moment in your life, is not as lofty as certain kinds of writing, or not as deep. And I found it to be the opposite usually. When someone's willing to be open about things that other people aren't open about, it usually it's incredibly serious. It's something that takes a lot of risk, and it's incredibly powerful when it's done in the right way, because it can really open both you up and others up. So
right.
I'm very grateful.
That's what I found. What's bringing to mind when you're talking about this is the first time I met Rosh. So I certainly was influenced by the bias that you mentioned, because when I met Rosh, I had just started the work with Jewish Community Watch, and I felt this, for the first time in my life, this real desire to speak publicly and to share my story. And I had an experience where I confronted my abuser, and I felt that it was a very unique experience, and I needed to share. That's the only word I can use. And Rosh was a friend of mine who I'd got to know a little bit. He was a local news reporter in Miami, and he had covered a break-in in my office, and we had kept some contact, but we certainly weren't close. But I reached out to him, and he said, "Why don't you prepare a talk and come over to my house and deliver it?" And my talk was laced with statistics, sayings, ideas. I had researched all sorts of things. And I remember Raj's words, like, "Cut the shit, Eli. Just no quotes, no data. If you want to mix it in, very, very little. Mix it around your story. You're on the stage, say what only you can say. Anyone can get up on stage and repeat someone else's quotes. Speak to me from the heart. And then when you mix it in with data, if you give me the one person who went through it, then you say 1 in 6 boys experience this, and I hear what your experience was, then the 1 in 6 means something. But if you just sit there and talk about data all day long, and you mention, oh, by the way, I was abused, but you don't bring me into the emotions, then it's not going to have the same effect. Elad, before I go to the others, are you a natural in terms of a writer? Is this something you always knew you had?
I definitely didn't always know I had it. I actually hated writing for a really long time. I think it was more because I had bad teachers or I was a bad student, probably both. But I think that, like, writing is something that it definitely in school is kind of taught as this like mechanical process, which is just so sad to me, because the moment that you leave high school, at least secular high school, you kind of at least are somewhat exposed to the idea. I don't know about everyone, but at least in college, somewhat exposed to the idea that writing is actually very fluid and very human and very not mathematical, and not, if that makes sense, not something where you just fill in the right numbers and it works out. It can be, and I don't mean to minimize writing that is like that, but it doesn't have to be like that. And so the moment that I understood that, and the moment that I started to write a little bit differently, because I always loved reading. I loved reading, and I guess I never really understood why there was a disconnect. The moment that I started to understand where this disconnect came from, I loved writing. So I don't know if I have a talent. I just know that
you have a passion.
I have a passion for it, and also like a commitment to it, I think, is something that a lot of people kind of forget, that you have to have that commitment as well.
That's often when I've read your articles, I found myself moved, and there was one that moved me especially, which we were talking about a couple of days ago when I discussed this idea, and I'll read it here. Just one sentence from an article you wrote called "What Depression Feels Like in the Moment." And you wrote, "That's what I did in the past. It's why I wrote about things like manic episodes and near-death experiences and hospital visits. It was always in the past tense. I needed my readers to participate in the myth of happy endings with me. and I needed them to believe what I wanted to believe, that mental illness was something you conquer and stand atop of it like a knight instead of manage like a simple office worker. And when I read that, I was like, man, I'm guilty of that, because I speak about my stuff often later on in the process as they're kind of worked through to some degree, or I don't feel comfortable talking about something usually until it's somewhat processed, somewhat resolved. And then I can say, I can share this with the world. And and that's what I think personal writing does, is that it holds a mirror to the reader, right? As opposed to an idea, it's like, boom, here's me and that's you. And we're the same in that way. Rosh, let's get to you quickly in terms of, I mean, you're a natural, right? You were on Broadway at 8 years old and everything else. So we know the answer to that. But this idea that you have, that you came to me, when I sat down with you and you said, just cut this shit, tell me your story. Where did you learn that? How did you know that that was the way to impact people?
Well, I think growing up in the theater, I think the theater was always a place of truth for me. I was in several Broadway shows as a child, and one of the things that I loved about the theater was that the theater always connected with characters, right? Every theatrical play has characters, and it's interesting. Just in preparation for this, as I was trying to get my thoughts together, there was a story that I read that I never knew, and it comes from Carmine Gallo's book, The Storyteller's Secret. And Cinderella's name, her given name was Ella. And she was given the name Cinder by her wicked stepsisters. Why? Because it was her job to sweep up all the ash. Well, after Ella marries the prince, she attached the name Cinder to her name so she would never forget where she came from. So it became Cinderella. And one of the reasons that I love that story so much is that I believe that there is great power in reframing your struggle. Like, all of us have struggles. And if you look in the theater, at the heart of the theater is what's known as the dramatic arc. We are all hardwired to root for the hero. Joseph Campbell talks about this in The Hero's Journey. You go see a movie like Rocky, we root for the underdog. So the dramatic arc is where we connect with people. And what I love about speaking and using words is that you are actually able to reframe your story and reframe your situation. And we can look at something like Cinderella and see a classic example of this, that she wanted to use the name Cinder because she took what was a tremendous struggle and she turned it into purpose, which I think is really beautiful. So
is that a theme you've seen? Meaning when we sat down for the first time, we weren't talking about healing. That wasn't the conversation at all. The conversation was about impact and how I could impact a room full of people. Is that something you've seen consistently as you've helped people tell their stories, that it's not only been used as a good way to impact others, but also to find healing for them as they're processing that?
So one of the major concerns I always get when I work with people is they say, I don't want to talk about myself because who cares about me?
That's what Elad's, that bias that Elad mentioned, that's exactly it.
I don't want to talk about myself. Who cares about me? And my message to people is it's just the opposite. And it's interesting, Max, I wanted to give you a quick shout out over here because your dad was a reporter, right? John Stossel.
Yeah, I think he'd say he still is.
Oh, still is, right? And so I looked up to John Stossel a lot as I became a reporter. And one of the first things that you learn as a reporter is that stories are about people. Stories are about people. And I remember when I went to Columbia School of Journalism, in one of my first classes, my professor, I went and I covered this issue and I wrote all about the stats and the figures and the statistics. And my professor said to me, where are the people in your story? Stories are about people. And so Eli, with you so many years later, when I'm sitting across from you and you're giving me stats and figures, it's the same concept. Stories are about people. Stories are about you. Here's the problem. Here's the biggest issue when it comes to that, is most people feel like they aren't worthy of delivering their story. They think, who cares? And what I have found time and time again is that those are the exact stories that people do care about. They don't want to see polished professional speakers. They really don't. They want to see people just like them, who struggle just like them, share those stories. And lastly here, getting back to Eli's talk for a second, you know, one of Eli's most powerful talks, I would say, was in Los Angeles when he spoke for JCW.
I was fired up for that one. The rabbis banned that event officially.
Oh,
Right.
They gave criticism to some of our events. That one was officially banned.
And one of the techniques that I used for that speech was to have Eli hold up a picture of himself as an 8-year-old boy. Right? I wanted the audience to see the person that was abused. This was a very powerful way of what Aristotle calls ethos, character development. For Eli, it was much easier to go to stats and figures, but when you saw this picture of Eli as an 8-year-old, and when I started working with Eli, I said, I want to see what you look like. And Eli put the picture up there so people could really see what the issue is. And when people kind of break through this self-conscious attitude that they don't matter, that's when they soar. And that's one of the greatest, why I'm happy in my life right now that, you know, I've graduated from TV news, because the stories aren't about the reporters. Stories aren't about the big celebrities. The stories are about you. And I want to kind of find all those stories and help people.
So Max, to get to you, I've mentioned in the past that you and I worked on a poem a bunch of years ago for Jewish Community Watch, but actually what I want to talk about is the workshop you did at our office a few months ago. So I'd reached out to Max, and we're always trying to bring different things to our company, and I've found that personal development is as necessary in a corporate environment as anywhere else. It's often the blocks that hold to success in any area of life, including in that area. And you know, Rosh has been at my office and trained a lot of the guys. And I reached out to Max and I said, do you do any workshops where you train people in poetry? Max is a spoken word poet. And he came in, and I don't remember how many there were, probably about 10 or 12 of us in there. And you gave us some ideas. And I found for me what was interesting, it was just after my son was born. And the poem that I kind of worked on in the class with you and delivered was the emotions I was feeling. And for me, it was this, you know, hospitals are kind of beer, you know, they're concrete and they're simple, and I don't want to use the word cheap because they're not cheap, but they're not like big fancy hotels. They're not these. And it was one of the most profound moments in my life. And I'm looking around the room and it's just as bare bones as it can get. And I wanted to put that into words, how those profound moments can come and often come in the simplest parts of life. So it wasn't a traumatic or a negative experience, but it was something, you know, being steeped in business and just steeped in our society where money is top of mind and success and all of those things are front and center, and then saying, okay, here's an experience that's attainable to everyone, done in the simplest way. And I don't want to say everyone, but regardless of socioeconomic status. And this was one of the most profound experiences. And I felt like I wanted to put that on paper, and I felt like I did. I felt like it processed something that also wasn't traumatic. So now, in terms of your own stories, writing, is it more like Rosh, where it was something you knew young, or more like Elad, where you developed a lot later on?
It was, I mean, I definitely liked poetry as a child and liked writing as a child, but I was 24 years old and I heard someone perform a poem. And I just remember just like some of like long phrases of words, and I would touch her withered skin and comment on how thin it is to keep in something infinite. Like that was ringing around in my brain. It was like kind of like a lot of words to remember at once. And I was like, something here has stuck with me. What's going on? Something's going on. And
Can you say those words again?
And I would touch her withered skin and comment on how thin it is to keep in something infinite. It's this poet named Q who was writing a poem about falling in love at 85. And he had shared that, and I was like, whew, I love that. And then on the way home, I was like, what's going on? Something's happening. And this was not at the time.
What were you doing then? What was were you in school? Were you working?
I was in marketing. I was working in social media marketing for Dove and Budweiser and companies like that. And I was on the way home, and I started, I pulled out my phone pad and like notepad and started just typing on it. And that was not something I had done really before that, other than being like, all right, like pick up groceries, call mom. Like I had not really just taken out my phone notepad to write. And I wrote down, I was like, I sit and ponder the beauty of slam poetry, wonder the reason it so flows with me. And then I was like, ooh, that rhymes. I was like, maybe I can do this. and I finished that poem. And then I saw him the next day and I said, hey, like I wrote something after your performance. Like, do you want to hear it? And he was like, okay. And then I read it for him and he was like, wow, you should consider pursuing this. And he still to this day is like an activator of creativity for me. But ever since, it's been such a powerful way of processing for me, because I love what you said about in mental health, like we want to shout it from the mountaintops. Look, I have conquered this thing. Like I did it, I beat it, and I'm sharing from this position of power, as opposed to what I think a lot of my favorite writing is like I'm in it and I'm trying to figure it out. And like this seems to be a process that helps me figure it out. And often my writing wants to be witnessed, whether that's by a small group, whether that's by a big group. But that process of figuring it out. And people often say to me after hearing my work, like, wow, that was so vulnerable. And my internal reaction is like, actually, like the way I'm doing it, I'm sharing you this crafted piece that like rhymes and is funny sometimes. Like, I know you're going to like this. Like, I sort of don't feel the vulnerability of doing it that way. Cause like, I'm about to share something polished that like, I know you're going to have a positive reaction. I'm going to get the feedback. I'm going to get the praise. I think it's often much more vulnerable, much more real to just like get up and say, or like just share, like, this is what I'm going through. I don't know if this is like, I don't know if you're going to like it or not. Just here's where I am. Here's what I'm going through. And I think that's the really,
when you shared the first poem, did you know it was good before you got the reaction?
That's a great question. I liked it. And I was like, I think this is good. I was like, I wanted his feedback. I was like, I think this is good. And that's been a pattern of mine with a lot of things that are within my mental capacities that I thrive in. And I'm actually dyslexic, but within verbal listening and writing, I test very highly in that side of things, but reading is challenging for me. But I tend to pick things up and be good at them quickly. And then it's hard for me when I have to do work. That's been a childhood pattern for me. But I was like, I think I got a good one fast, and then I'll get praise for having done a good one fast. Look, I can be good without having done a lot of work at being good. It fit all of my childhood things that I was working on.
Do you use your writing to process? I mean, a lot I know the answer to because he puts a lot of his work out there, but do you use your own writing to process difficult emotions, maybe a breakup or some childhood stuff that comes up?
Absolutely. And in my shows, I share the more polished pieces of that, but like, I actually I do these writing workshops every Sunday. All welcome, invited. They're free. And that's like been a really powerful place too, for I think everybody involved to really just process what's going on. Like we talk for like 30 minutes and see what comes up and what's present, and I'll perform a poem. And then after that, like we go, it's whatever's there. And it's like, I think it's wonderful to have that space to just kind of figure out what's going on in our own challenging lives. And because it's a great medium for that.
And you find that when people are coming to the workshops, that's what they're looking for, and that's what they're benefiting in that way in terms of the healing?
It's funny. I think people are coming and looking for different things. And I've had a clarity recently that I don't particularly care what you're looking for. Like I have this confidence and this faith that like, when we really get to what's present, like, and I think that's my job in the workshops, is like, what's here with you now? Because I'm much less interested in what the brain of Eli wants to write than I am in what wants to come through Eli. And so like, I'm big on like, oh, I want to write about this thing. I hear that. I'm like, okay. I'm like, if that's what comes, great. And like, if it's not, I really want to hear what came instead, because something was trying to get out of you. And my favorite kind of writing happens that way, when it's like, let me get this thing that I call Max out of the way so that writing can just happen, so that I can just be like trying to catch what's coming through me. And that I have found in my own experience does not care what Max wants to write about. Like, or what, like I'm going to write.
I'm remembering now in your workshop that you used a certain technique. I didn't start off thinking I was going to write about the birth of my son. in that
Right.
workshop.
And then that's what was there in that moment, right? And I love that so much. And there is something in the poetry, I think, that activates. And I often say the first thing that came and is there, write about that. Don't let the mind come in and steer it a different direction, and just start going and just start going. And it's been really profound for people. And it's so beautiful. People often just need the invitation. Often, like at workshops, I remember us talking and saying, you're like, oh, what's the format going to be? How's this going to work? And I was like, I'm going to get up. I'm going to share a little bit. I'm going to give a prompt. And I think it's amazing. And I think you saw this too, just when you really give the space and the invitation to like share your story. I'm here to help if you need it, but like share. People have such deep, powerful stories within that are waiting to come out.
Right. I've seen that a lot with Rosh's workshops, and I've stood on a lot of his workshops where he does that, where he opens it up. And what I've commented to Rosh often is that a lot of what he's doing is exactly that, creating that space that gives permission for this. The analogy I like to use is almost like sports, right? There are very few settings that it would be completely appropriate for me to stand up and go, yeah! But at a sports game, there's a lot going on. But one of the main things people pay for is the permission to just go crazy and express oneself in that way. And I think that creating that space, right, is often what we're looking for and paying for. Elad, do you like your own work?
I think, it's interesting. I used to hate all my work, I think. And then recently I switched to only liking like the most recent thing I wrote. And it doesn't mean that I hate my other writing or that I look down on it. I think maybe it's more a reflection of my own stuff, but I very often feel like, oh man, like you were so young. And this is like a piece 2 months ago, where I feel very, and I guess that's part of it, right? The writing in the moment of the insecurities that you had and all these things, or whatever you're feeling in that time, I think is very often, you're almost purposefully putting the flaws into that stuff. And ironically, I don't think most people would agree with me, but I would say that to a certain extent, my political writing is like that as well. And where to a certain extent, you're just kind of, or I'm throwing this stuff out, and I'm like 90% sure of it, and then later I find out that 10% of it was okay and good, or right, I should say, correct. But mostly what I realize as I look back on it is like there's kind of these two feelings. One is that feeling of like, oh man, I didn't know these things, or I could have grown a lot. I should have realized these things. And then there's another side, which is like, wow, I'm really proud that I did that in that moment at that time, because of those flaws. And I think
when you're writing, what are you going for? Is it more of an internal process that you want to, internal emotions that you want to get out, ideas that you want to get out of yourself, or having an impact on others? What's the focus, or some and some?
That's a really good question. I think that it depends on the piece. I think no matter what, there's something inside of me. It could be intellectual. Now I would say I've kind of grappled with both sides. Like it could be an intellectual thing or an emotional thing that I am overwhelmed with, in some sense. I might not even realize it. Like I'm feeling anxiety, and then I write this piece, and then all of a sudden it's gone, and I realize, oh, this thing has been bouncing around in my brain for however long. And it's kind of like the way I describe it, and I think they're actually not even analogous. I would say they're the same thing. Is when you have like a really good, deep conversation with someone you love. I would say like that is often similar to a piece of writing in which you like let out whatever is going on inside, because the point is that we all have these things that are bouncing around inside of us, either subconsciously or consciously. And that could be as much like a personal thing, as much as it's a political thing, or a ideological thing, or a religious thing, or a spiritual thing. Meaning to say that we have a lot of things bouncing around inside of us. And so the beauty of writing is that it gives us At least in my until you publish it, it gives you the perfect audience where you just get to scream at the piece of paper or cry into the piece of paper. I mean, then you get the commenters, and that's a different story. But until then, it's the best audience, I would say.
You take a lot of risks with your writing. I don't know if all your writing, but there are a few pieces. One that comes to mind, I think, was called F God, right? And living in an Orthodox community.
I mean, that's not the actual name of it.
What was the name of the?
No, I'm saying you didn't fully pronounce the full title.
You could if you want. I mean.
Oh, I can't hear you now.
I think you had an asterisk in there.
I can't hear you. I don't know what just happened. Am I the only one that can't hear anybody?
Yeah, I think just you.
Can't hear anybody. I think Hashem is blaming me for this right now because I literally can't hear anybody.
You really can't hear anyone? You're not joking?
Yeah.
You can't.
I can hear you.
Should I disconnect and reconnect?
If you actually can't hear, yeah, disconnect and reconnect. And we'll go to Rosh.
All right. Yes, I'm blaming God. I'm sorry. All right.
Rosh, in terms of you've coached a lot of people to take the stage.
Right.
And is there one story that comes to mind of someone who you saw? It's a two-part question. Number one is, where do you see the journey that someone goes through? And oftentimes people talk about a profound experience going through your process and training. Do you see it more in leading up to the speech and preparing their story and getting ready for it? Or is it when they deliver their talk?
Oh, I just saw somebody here that I believe, I'll call him out, Charles Zolte, who I believe joined us here. And this is a great example of it. What I love most about the work that I do is giving people self-confidence. I believe that the stage prior to Corona was like in a theater, but now the stage is everywhere, right? This is a stage, your phone is a stage. We've been doing Zoom calls. So the excuse that you don't have a theater doesn't apply. And so if I can, I believe, Charles, you're on this. This is an amazing story. This is somebody who dealt with a speech impediment his whole life. And actually his wife looked into the work that we were doing, and Charles started his training. Now, what was incredible about this particular training was there was no big stage event. Yet when Charles went through the process, he was able to develop a message. Part of my technique is that you need to have a message. What is your personal mission statement? There's a close link between developing your identity and the ability to share your story. Sharing your story develops your identity, I believe.
Right.
And so his message was, find the kind people. That throughout his life, he was able to look back and to recognize that there were kind people along the way who helped him get through his struggles with speech. What was interesting about that is that I don't believe Charles actually thought about what is his personal mission statement, what is my message, until he was able to sit down there. And what I love is I love to take people who have been through a lot. I think all of us, myself included, have been through a lot in various ways. And to be able to have them sit down and say, what is your message? I remember there was this 11-year-old boy, the Boys and Girls Club, where we do some work. His name is Benjamin Prophet. And I said to him, what's your message? I'll never forget this. And you know what he said to me? He goes, no one ever asked me that question before. And I said, why not? And he said, because I don't matter.
He said those words?
He said, because I don't matter.
Wow.
Benjamin Prophet was arrested twice before the age of 11. And you wonder why he was arrested. You have somebody who's sitting there and thinking to themselves, he doesn't matter. And in a matter of weeks, he was able to go from this kid who felt like he didn't matter to being able to stand up and deliver a message. I think that my whole ideology has kind of progressed a little bit, where the stage is everywhere today. The stage can be online writing. The stage can be poetry. The stage can be your phone. But I think it is so empowering when you're able to sit down and say, what do I stand for? And perhaps more importantly, how can my story help or inspire somebody else? That's the biggest thing that I've recognized on this journey for the last 2 years, is that people have these experiences and they feel a lot of shame because they feel all alone in their experiences. But yet when they're able to learn how to share their experiences, they create community because they're inevitably reached out by other people who have gone through it. And finally, I will say this, on my own kind of spiritual journey, if you will, I was brought up without any structured, organized religion. Then became very involved. And this whole process of the last kind of 2 months made me do a lot of self-evaluation. And one of the things that I came to terms with is, at least for me, one of the highest forms of spirituality or religiosity is to reach out to your neighbor. Now, that's why I love this. That could be through the written word, that could be through a speech, that could be through a phone call. But certainly don't be silent. Don't sit there and not share an experience when your experience can truly help somebody out, especially now.
In the book that I'm reading, Expressive Writing, Writing That Heals, it's called, one of the ways that they tried to measure the benefits of people who went through a process of writing was not just self-reporting, but also looking at their doctor's visits and seeing if chronic illnesses is often connected to trauma, and disease is often connected to emotions and things like that, and seeing, do visits go down? And the premise for the writing, for the author's work, was a study that they didn't do, but a study that they came across where they looked at a number of people and they categorized them in 3 different ways. One is no obvious childhood trauma, right? So they had 6 or 7, I think the ACE, right? Adverse childhood experiences, right? Have they experienced these types of trauma? And if they haven't, that's one category. And if they haven't, then they're one of 2 categories. Either they confided in others or they didn't. And then they compared that to how often they went to a doctor. And the ones with no trauma went the least often to a doctor. Something like 40% less than the ones who did have trauma. But then within actually it wasn't 40%, it was about half of those, if I recall correctly. And then between the ones who confided in someone else and didn't confide in someone else, with that same idea of putting words to the experiences, there was about a 40% difference. Those who didn't confide in anyone else were visiting doctors more often. So based on that study, they started looking at a lot more studies and what kind of writing and what kind of speaking, and does it make a difference if you're typing? Does it make a difference if you're actually writing by hand? And they came to different conclusions. But one of the things, I'll just read this one line, and I don't want to take over the whole book, use this to talk just about the book. But one thing it said, which reminded me a lot of your work, says the take-home message from this research is that it is important to acknowledge the bad and look for the good, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that they found that writing really heals, I mentioned story previously, is if people didn't go into the pain and didn't acknowledge that it existed and weren't willing to talk about emotions, similar to what Elad spoke about earlier, you're writing about ideas and things like that, there's a disconnect. Or when I came in to sit with you for the first time and speaking, if I just gave that speech about statistics and data and research, it would not have had the same impact as it did when I brought in my personal experience, not just to the audience, but to myself. But then the other part, like they found people who just wrote about the same negative experience over and over, didn't report and show measurable progress in healing. It was ones who were using words that searched for reasons, for meaning. To me, you mentioned spirituality is helping people. I agree with that 100%. I think that one of the ways that I try to incorporate spirituality into my life is believing that all experiences are there for a reason. Right. So it's continuously searching for those reasons that instead of why is this happening to me, and that question that for me sat with me for so many years, why did these bad things happen to me? And instead turn it into like change the inflection a little bit. And why did this happen to you? Like, what are you going to do with it that this happened to you? What benefit are you going to create from it? And I thought a lot about your work, Rosh, where you really push people and you say, hey, it's a story, right? You have to have that arc. You can't get stuck in the problem. You got to give me the overall flow, the story.
I'm so glad we've had several people, right here. How can I put my perfectionism aside? Perfectionism is, I hear this all the time in my work, that I want to be perfect when I get up there and speak, or I want to be perfect when I write. And Max, you can chime in here, or Elad. I say just do it. Like audiences are very simple. They're not looking for the Da Vinci of performance or of poetry or of writing. I go back a lot to what Maya Angelou said, and that is that people will not remember what you said, they'll remember how you made them feel. And so when I tell people, get in touch with your emotions, doesn't matter what the context of the exact words are. This is not a grammar contest. This is about getting your message out with other people. So whoever wrote this about perfectionism, I hear that all the time. And quite frankly, it's an excuse. Quite frankly, you got to go out there and you got to do it. You got to just do it.
A mentor of mine says, actually, you're not a perfectionist, you're just insecure.
Right.
You're not what?
A perfectionist, you're just insecure. Which I think is, is blunt, but is powerful a lot of the time, where it's like, oh, is this actually, and to me, there's two branches of it. Sometimes it's like, I'm not saying the thing that I mean to be saying. And that's a perfectionism that's like worth visiting, of like, okay, how can I work with this story to help that so that I am saying the thing that I mean to be saying? But beyond that, I think it's true that it's like often then no, it's not quite right. It could be this more, it could be that more. At a certain point, you gotta just, if you want it out, you gotta put it out, because its endings are lies and it's never gonna be exactly perfect. There's always gonna be something.
Elad, we got cut off earlier when I was asking about the F God article that you wrote. So I wasn't sure if you were joking that you couldn't hear what I was saying.
No, I was just trying to escape. I was just trying to get out. I was hoping you wouldn't bring it up again, but.
But I wanted to talk about some of what you seem to do. Max mentioned earlier that, he has this writing that's more raw. I don't know if he used that word, but when he stands up in front of a group of people, he kind of knows the reaction, outside of what happened last week when you did the porn poem in front of a group of recovering people recovering.
Still got the praise. Just had some other stuff in there too.
Right. It took time to get to the praise, but what you're talking about, you kind of know the reaction you're going to get. Whereas I see you take tremendous risks with your writing. So what's that about, and what are you going for, and when you're hitting publish?
Yeah, that is a good question. I wish I had a perfect answer to it, but luckily I am a recovering perfectionist, so I'm going to try and, I think that, ironically, I get a lot of these, I think it's a very common thing for artsy, Bali Tshuva, people who became religious later in life, that as they grow and evolve, they're very often told like, I miss the old you. I miss it. It's good. And one of the things I found was that there's kind of two things going on when I hear that. Number one, I hear, that there's a certain attachment and all these things to an idealized version that I myself kind of like feel like a monster, like I created a monster. Like this thing was not what you thought it was. It's kind of connected to the depression thing. But on the other hand, I also think that it's very connected to the entire process, which is when I first was writing, it was terrifying for me to put it out, much more terrifying than it is now. So yes, in a sense, right now I'm getting more backlash than I used to. But in another sense, internally, I'm less scared than I used to be. And the reason for that is because when I first started writing, I was an obsessive perfectionist, not in the sense of like I was worried about every detail, but I just didn't want to get anything out into the world. I would literally call my wife after publishing an article and tell her, okay, I'm having a panic. This is really hard. I'm freaking out, you know, and it would be like an article that no one read. But in my head, it was like this huge thing. And the reason I'm saying that is because the process itself, I don't think is so different, which is that I discover some truth, right? That I consider to be incredibly important, whether it's to myself, like an internal truth, or a truth that I consider to be essential in some sense that I found to be essential for my dealings with others. So for example, you know, understanding how, and I can't get into the, you know, it's going to take forever to get into the actual details, but how certain like progressive political ideology was like really important in this moment, in this time. And so I had to just get that out there. And so either one of those, in a sense, is like a combination of a willingness to accept when this comes out, it's not going to come out exactly the way I want it to come out. And it's going to involve me putting myself on the line, and it's going to involve upsetting people. It's going to involve like me upsetting myself that I didn't, you know, all these things. But it's also going to have this kernel, and I think this is what it was always like for me. There's going to be this kernel of truth to me, which is like, this thing matters so much, I have to get it out there. And like I was saying, that's kind of before I was relating it to the subconscious thing that's bouncing around. I think part of it is emotional, but part of it I see as spiritual, is that there's something, I've discovered some kernel, and it could be covered in schmutz, and I, you know, when I put it out, but ultimately, like within there's something true, I hope, or I believe. And I think
if you had never developed this gift, what do you think your life would be like? If you had never found this gift that you have, this gift to express yourself through the written word, what do you think your life would be like now?
I don't know, I would probably be in a mental institution. I mean, I think that, and I mean that literally, like I think that, I think there's a reason a lot of like quote unquote sensitive people, and I think that's the wrong term, but it's the one I have bouncing around right now, is like are often dealing with things like mental illness or mental health issues.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it, you know, this is, you know, we were talking about how much better it makes people feel when they go through trauma, but like trauma is this environmental trigger, which was really important to work through. But that's just the extreme of the reality, which is that we're all dealing with a lot within ourselves. And we all need, I don't think it's a gift as much as like this, or if it is a gift, it's a gift that God gave to everybody. Maybe some people do it professionally and some people do it, you know, loudly, but there's a whole group of people, I'm guessing at least 90.
When you say God gave it to everyone, what do you mean by that? That it's available to everyone?
Yeah.
Or that you think everyone can do what you do?
Not what I do. What I mean, I think we all, like, I think the whole point of it is that we all do what we're meant to be doing, and it's just, and that's why I relate it to the conversation, right? Like, you're never gonna have, you Eli, are never gonna have the same conversation with, let's say, with me as you would have with, or as I would have, you know, with someone else, which is to say that we are all. We're all unique. Like this is genetically true. This is, you know, spiritually, I believe, true as well. But the one thing that we do have in common is we have the power for self-expression. I mean, that's not only a power. It's, I would actually describe it more as a need. Like, we need to express ourselves.
We need to express. I agree with that.
We're very unhealthy when we don't express ourselves. And
I describe my addictive impulse as, just to be crude, if it doesn't come out of my mouth, it comes out of my schmeckle. That's
fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough. I mean, and I think that's true. It comes.
I found that over and over.
It's going to come out somewhere, you know. Like, and I think that's the point. And or if it doesn't, it's really not healthy. And I think there's a lot of people that live like that, unfortunately.
I mean, there is, and the science and data speak for that. I'd like to take a brief. I just want to hear from people who are listening in. Is this landing with anyone? Is this impactful? Is what we're saying hitting anything? If you just put it in the chat section, I'd love to go to some questions, and I have a question I want to ask Max, and then we'll get to actual questions. So if you guys could just put in the chat so we don't feel like we're talking to nobody. Loving it. Great stuff. What's up, Steve? Not everyone at once. Finding it relaxing. Okay. We'll turn it up a notch.
What about control?
What about control? What about control? Really beautiful. Thank you. So people are having a hard time expressing themselves with writing in the chat while we're talking about this.
There's a
Fantastic stuff. Well, yes, there'll be a recording on YouTube.
Someone just took it.
Sign language is another form of expression. You know what
I
the
like
data
that a
says?
lot. I like that a lot.
What?
The sign language as a form of expression. That's brilliant. I haven't heard anyone speak about that. That would be amazing. Adele.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been amazing. Okay, beautiful. So it's landing with some people. Max, so I think from the other panelists, you're unique in the sense that you write work and then you perform the work. And you've done a couple of TED Talks and you have your own, you had your own theater show.
Maybe soon to be online, debating that whole process.
So in terms of you, that the writing process of it versus the performing process of it, is there really, as it connects to healing or processing of emotions, any of that stuff, what is that like for you?
As a message is coming through, I am often, especially at the beginning, I was like thinking about the audience. Like as it's coming through, thinking, is this landing? Something's happening to me. I'm experiencing something, whether that's a message coming through or something that I've had in my life. And I really have this thing that I want to give you. Like, I really want you to have it. Like, I'm having it. I want you to have it. I want you to be able to have it in a way that you can see it and you can understand it. And so like, and a message to me often is only as good as its ability to be received, like in a context of communication, not expression, but communication. And so I am literally in the writing process. I will leave space or notes being like, like just me. Like no one's gonna get that. Like I need to come back later for that one because I understand, but people aren't gonna understand that one, and would be very aware of the process and the difference between something that as I share, you will understand it, and oh, it's this. And I've been these writing workshops, and actually every Monday before Corona, my barber and spiritual teacher would come over and we would talk and write together.
Is that the same person?
Yes, the same person. He has 3 master's degrees, one in divinity, one in theater.
You said a barber and spiritual teacher. So he's a barber.
Yeah, barber.
Okay. He hasn't been over in a little while.
We just do it on the phone, but he's a gay man who's on his way of becoming a minister, but he took a different route because he, fell out of love with the church in that. But he cuts hair because it gives him an opportunity to one-on-one deliver his sermons. And my barber really is a preacher. Wow. He gives me lessons through the mirror. He spouts wisdom like a fountain that makes life a little clearer. Last time, he told me he was the Alka-Seltzer, witnessing his self dissolve into the world around him, knowing that's the only legacy he'd ever truly leave, as the pieces of his being dissolve into the existential sea, an ocean of souls. The witness observing the pieces of his self that help others to grow as he lets his ideas of whatever self is go. It's a direct quote. But my barber is a realist. His ideals are the idealist, but he's grounded in reality. Last time he said to me, who could live and actually be that witness all the time? Like who could watch their parents die and stand to only be the eyes witnessing life's tragic processes as they simply pass us by? And I reply, only those who lie. And maybe the dickheads, I joke. I expect a laugh, but no, he lets my crass avoidance go and gently brings us back to flow as he smiles and makes it known that no, even the dickheads get chapped. And they know better than most, Max, where bullshit comes and goes. My barber, he's a clever bloke. We talk of love and loss and shaking off the scars that lovers leave with us. And he reminds me, greater love is pouring in from up above, that it's on us to open up to all that is awaiting us. Reminds me that in our 20s, we tend to confound love and need. And when the ones we love do leave, we look on them as though they're thieves. I feel that wisdom deeply. The thief who stole the part of me entwined in our dependency, who left this hole in my identity. You are whole, he assures me. There's a gift she leaves as she leaves. By robbing you of her loving, she's showing you the Alka-Seltzer. But even when your heart has nothing left to bleed, your eyes in tears too hurt to breathe, there's truth. Beneath the pain, you see your whole. Beyond the hole she leaves. My barber, he's a man of God. This fact I found a little odd, as every Sunday he was taught he'd burn in hell for who he loved. He was deeply conflicted by that faith, as by the text that earned his place in fire for eternity, I see this tear drop down his face. He can't help but feel the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and yet the peace that haunts him most is his sacred, very own love for his fellow man. And I just want to reach out my hand and help him understand that in all of God's infinite plans, there's not a single one of them where he's not death and destined. And so through the mirror, I look him in the eye. And though right is left and left is right, we connect in this reflective light. Our souls shine bright. His holy light shines right through the mirror. Sometimes I wonder if God himself is speaking in my ear. If God himself is cutting my hair. If I'm looking at God through the mirror. And then I imagine how the world would look if every single person could recognize the way we should that God is in the mirror. It can be easier to see the divinity in others, harder to discover that it's God who's hiding under all this skin. We think of God as perfection, but the one who created everything created imperfection. There's not a single emotion that isn't him. And so through the mirror, I look him in the eye. And mirrors have delays in time, reflections, milliseconds behind, as light projects this false divide that I'm not you and you're not I. And that's the work, to live our lives embracing that connection, right? To see beyond elusive sight, to look inside and recognize the Alka-Seltzer. There's this play he loves to quote in which an angel shows this woman moments from her own past. And as they look on at her life instead of back, the woman to the angel asks, do they know? Do they know? Does anyone ever truly realize life as they live it? The breadth and depth of this beautiful existence present with them in every minute. No, the angel replies. The saints and sages, maybe they do some, but never in all of its magnificence. The tragedy lies in the rift between what we perceive and all that is. This constant choice we make of finite over infinite. That we refuse to accept the fullness and completeness of this gift. It is a lot to take in for a haircut. I don't know if I'm ready, I tell him. And he reminds me the jump from not ready to ready is just a thought away. And we can make it any day. Okay, Max, you can get up to pay whenever you're ready. He holds up another mirror behind my head to help me see this part of me I never get to see. How does it all look? He asks. And so that's my barber. And the reason I bring it up is that he comes over on Mondays. And we have these beautiful conversations. And then we write together. And we're seeing what to do with all the writing that's come out. But I'm like, wow, like so much is reflective of our conversations. It's for each other. And it can be very challenging sometimes to bring everybody else in on the context. But anyway, that took a long time. I don't want to leave space for other things. But I think the point there being of like, it can often be hard to let the world in on the context of a specific moment. And I think that's a skill set that takes time to be developed.
That was incredible. Rosh often tells people that when you're not expressing yourself, you're robbing the world of. Rosh, what's the expression you use?
Robbing the world of a gift. I just want to, for a second, Eli, we're getting a lot of questions here that I want to make sure that I answer, if that's okay.
Let me finish my thoughts on this, okay, and then jump to that. So I just wonder what would have happened. The same question for Elad. What would have happened had you not, like, where do you think you would be now had you not only found that you had this gift, but worked to develop it? I think of that often, that first interaction, right? When we do so, when we put something out there, like what's the first comment we get back is like we're opening ourselves up and someone can touch us and really hurt us in that moment. And when you shared it with that, you had mentioned someone who you heard a poem, of his, and then you worked on one the next day and repeated it to him. If those two things hadn't happened, where do you think you would be?
I think I would be just much, it's hard to imagine. It's like truly hard to imagine, like the gift that expression has been to my life. And like, it would, I think what you said is right. It would leak out in other ways. It like, there's people joke that creativity and like murderers, like that there's similarity of like, this is going to come out in some degree. It's like, are we going to go kill a bunch of people or are we going to express ourselves? And it's, it's not exactly the same, but there's something deep in us that wants out. And I'm so grateful to have found this outlet that happens to fit for me. And I couldn't recommend. It seems like everybody that I ever do a workshop with, it's like there's always something there. And writing is a tool that's at our disposal, at everyone here's disposal. I think that's one of the reasons it's so accessible. I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't I can maybe make an emotional thing on a paper, but I can't like express myself that way. This happens to be it for me. And I hope it can be a gift to other people too. It's just been, I truly can't imagine where I'd be 1,000 times less satisfied with my life is what I know to be true.
Yeah, I think about that also in terms of me. If I never walked into Rosh's office, Rosh's home and worked on the speaking, and I felt like I didn't have a voice. And when I think about what abuse did to me, like the childhood where I was left without a voice. That was the feeling that was most pronounced. And then my journey has been finding and reclaiming and reclaiming my voice. And I'm still doing it. I'm still doing it through this. And
we so badly want to be seen, right? Yeah. Like as human beings, truly we so deeply want to truly be seen.
Right.
And like, that's, for me, the poetry, for a moment, we're looking at something together. It's like, we're actually here. You're getting to know my barber through my eyes, like in that poem, like for one moment on one thing. Oh, we're actually connected, like right now. It's like that gift of connection. And I think we're all desperately, all artists, all creatives, all speakers, we're desperately, I think, trying to be seen and trying to help each other see each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rosh, and a lot of your work is not only your own expression. And I know recently you did your talk talking about losing your dad and the emotions from that, and eventually developing a gambling addiction and working through that. But a lot of your work now is helping others express and helping others find their own story. Is that healing for you when you're able to do that? And where does that come from for you?
1,000%. It comes from wanting to fight for the underdog. Someone put a comment here that I really do want to address. They say, well, all you guys are well known, so it's easy for you to speak.
I knew you were going to, I noticed that. I knew you were going to.
Or right. And please, that's really kind of like the inertia behind my work. Everybody with a little bit of work can get up there on a stage. I also want to make it very clear here that writing and speaking are two different skill sets.
Who was it who said that? Who was it who said that?
I'm not sure, but it's I think they were called Ken State. I don't know who Ken State is.
Ken, can I be so bold as to just loop you into the conversation, make you a panelist? Can you just say yes or no? And Rosh does magic. So right. I'd love to see. Rosh, you're comfortable with that, right?
Yeah, sure.
Ken, would you like to? I
don't know if Kent is still there. It's Kent State, as in the university. So I don't think that's
got it. Okay, if he says yes, I'll bring him in, and then we'll hear. Because I noticed that talk too. He said, "Oh, you guys are famous, so people listen to you." Not on cam, but audio fine. You got it, Ken. Kent. Give me a second. We're gonna loop him in.
Kent, the one that asked about nobodies, etc.
Right, that you have to be famous to speak.
Well, no, the whole issue is that you guys obviously, Eli, he's done a TEDx talk. I don't know what you guys do for incomes, but it sounds like it's definitely, part of it is around writing and speaking and all this kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of people, I realize part of what I was saying is because I'm in a very difficult place in my life right now. I'm in my later 50s. I've been a professor overseas. I came back to the States. I've had a really hard time with an income. I'm actually living with my mother. I'm a single gay guy, never had a relationship. I have a porn addiction, yada, 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 yada. And basically, I feel like a giant zero, and in about all respects. So I'm at, this sounds really crass maybe, but you guys sort of piss me off to a certain extent. I mean, yeah, it's like you have this platform, you have these audiences, you're successful. And then there's people like me that are nobody. We could spill our guts on paper and it's not going to go anywhere. Nobody's going to see it. Nobody cares. It's like, that's where this is. I know that's crass and that's really direct, but that's exactly where I'm coming from.
So Kent State, I got to jump in here for a second. First of all, you should have seen Eli before the TED Talk, years before the TED Talk. I want to ask you a question. Can I ask you a question, Kent?
Sure.
So if you're driving down I-95 and you see your face on a billboard, what does the billboard say?
I have no clue.
Think about it for a second. What's your message? If your face is on a billboard, what does the billboard say? There's a reason I'm asking you this question. What does it say? What are you passionate about?
That's a good question.
And
I don't think I ever knew what my passion was. I think I got snuffed out when I was about 3 years old.
Okay. So if you can find what you are passionate about, there are so many forums today where you can express your passion. And there are websites where you can write for free. There's your phone where you can go live on social media. Here's what my point is to you. When you develop a message and you deliver that message, you're telling the world that you are worthy to speak. No longer do you have to sit in silence, but if you put the work into it and you said to yourself, who am I? What do I stand for? And here's most importantly the point, Kent. Everything that you've been through in your life has good in it. And when you find the good in it and you can use it to help somebody else out, you'll find your identity and therefore find some meaning and find happiness. Does anything that I said make sense?
Yeah, it all makes sense. But the problem is finding any of that, finding purpose, finding passion. I guess that's the bottom line, where I feel very angry, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's good that you're expressing this, because I think, I'm not going to speak for Max and Elad, but I think this is part of the work that all artists do, is to try to connect with people, to tell them that there is hope. Hope is so important, Ken. So don't be angry. One last thing before I let this conversation move forward.
Rosh, why don't you take him through a little bit of your process? I think it would be enlightening for all of us to see, and certainly beneficial for Kent. Like, don't be just the fact that we're here. We're fine. We're observing. I'll speak for myself, Elad, and Max, and all the listeners. We're okay.
Well, the first
we're
thing
observing.
Is, I'm all about authenticity, and I'm calling you by a college name, so that throws me off a little bit. But
no, just call me Kent. It's fine.
Okay, so Ken, I'll go back to this. What are you passionate about?
Like I told you, I don't really know.
Ken, what was the last thing you did that you're proud of?
Oh.
Can be small.
Yeah, I'm pulling blanks on almost all of this stuff.
And it's okay. I want to commend you, because we're here talking about expression. You came in, you did something hard. You called out that this was pissing you off. Like, that's a beautiful, to me, example of like expressing yourself in a public setting where that can be hard to do, and really sharing what you feel. And I'm sure it named the feelings of some other people here too, as expression does. So I already want to commend you and
I
say
mean,
that you're calling yourself a zero, and I see much more than that just in this action alone. And so I just want to acknowledge that for you.
Yeah, I think, well, when I used to live overseas, the thing I did most in my free time was I would go to art galleries 3 times a month, probably on average, and spend hours and hours and hours looking at art.
Who was your favorite artist?
Oh, I have no idea.
Do you remember any artists that influenced you?
For me, it could be, it's not about who, and that's one thing that actually sort of annoyed me. It's like, I don't care who's the name on it. I'm sick of stuff being name driven. It's like we should be judging by its purpose, by its quality.
So am I.
Oh, one second, Rush. He was getting to a message. That's the billboard message. But whatever you're saying right here, if we can pack it into a nice sentence, that's the billboard, and that's what I was hearing. So, can you continue on that thought?
I would just look at stuff. This was actually in Asia. I would look at stuff and find stuff that I liked. To me, it really didn't matter who it was. It didn't matter which school they'd gone to. And it was a fairly elitist society. It's like, if you didn't go to these schools, then you were nobody. But I thought, that's ridiculous. I care, do they have a consistent technique? Do they have a consistent voice? Do they say something? Does it jump off the wall and hold my attention? That's to me what I really, and I was an educator. In fact, I even taught speech. So, but the whole issue to me is why, I guess it really pisses me off that there's a certain subset of people, because they have pretty faces and a lot of money, everybody knows them.
Yeah, Ellie.
And the other, and there's everybody else that probably is actually more interesting in many respects that nobody knows about.
You know what?
That pisses me off.
And I'm going to jump in here. You're 1,000% correct. And here's the good news for you. I think coronavirus has changed all that. I think that the priorities are less about what you are talking about, actually, the pretty faces and the money, and more about those with depth and meaning. So if you're driving down I-95 and there's a message on a billboard, I think it is what somebody just said here, is that it's essence over packaging, right? Let's not be superficial, correct?
Right, yeah.
That's your message. And boy, could that be powerful, especially today, especially from an educator who, many times, my wife's an educator, they don't get the respect they deserve.
Yeah, especially not in this country.
And especially not in this country. So you're right. The short answer is that you're right.
Is it okay if I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't know. It's funny to me. The reason I laughed, and I feel bad that I laughed, was because I identify with it so much. I think, and it's very bizarre to me to all of a sudden have it flipped around, which I kind of am enjoying the feeling for one moment of being anyone calling me a pretty face, I'll take it. But or having money, But it's. No, but I the truth is the reason I laughed is because I feel it very strongly within me as well, and I don't mean to get into the ideology of it. I actually think what I wanted to address was anger, because I feel that and it sounds like maybe I have a different opinion than I might or might not, but I feel like anger is when we talk about expression and the need to express ourselves and the need to address what's bouncing around inside, it's often packaged in different emotions. And I think that I think some people discount the power of anger. I think anger often comes from not necessarily a long period, but a period of suppressed emotion. I think I was just listening. I was going to bring this up in another context, but it happens to apply here too. I was just listening to this interview with John Singleton, who was a director, a Black director, and he was interviewed about a lot of things, just about art and about his work and about political action. And one of the things that happened was that the interviewer asked him, what do you think about the fact that it seems like a lot of people are very suspicious? I'm going to mangle this actual question, but the answer is what matters. About the fact that a lot of people seem concerned about Black people coming together and unifying under certain movements, which is actually really interesting when you think about recent movements. And he said, the problem isn't movements. The problem is when people try to stop the movements, because then what happens is there's all this energy that's pent up, that was ready to go into something positive and creative, and now it's going to go somewhere else. And it could mean a lot of different things where it goes. But the point being that when we stop that thing, and I'm not saying it's we ourselves, it's often other people, it's often our experiences or these sorts of things. That's when anger develops. One of many situations in which anger develops. And I think as an artist, for me, I think that your anger is valid and it matters. And I think you should be able to, I think that is a message in and of itself. I know that there's a deeper message within it and there's hope and all these things, but at the end of the day, I think like in the moment right now, anger is beautiful and powerful because it's very real to you. It may be not as real as whatever is deeper underneath it, but it is real. And I think that, something I've struggled with, which is why I'm very passionate about it, is that, we often get told that we should feel ashamed of feeling angry. And I think very often what that just leads to is more shame. And I wouldn't say I don't know if the right word is to embrace anger, but I would at least say to express anger. And I think especially art and expression are beautiful ways to do that. So sorry to rant, but something I happen to.
One other thing I want to add on the root question of, well, we have audiences. It's just that I have noticed, and granted, like we have been spoiled in this. I especially have been spoiled in this. I have had messages that have online traveled to millions of people. And what I've noticed is that if it is 1 million, I want 10. If it's 10 million, I want 100. It is this totally bullshit treadmill. And it's been surprising to me because I will watch that happen and notice the ridiculousness as like, oh, when that one got 1,000, I really wanted to have 5,000. But it's just like, it was the slot machine game that actually wasn't about the number at all. And so I would ask in terms of expectation, you're obviously a very intelligent person who wants to express and wants to be a part of the art world in some capacity. And I would just ask within the expectation of like, if it was really heard by one person, by two people, wouldn't that be really powerful? Wouldn't that be something? I think it's not about, it happens to be that yes, we have been working for a long time to reach more and more people. But I don't think I think that, well, it's not going to be seen by a lot of people. So why? It's one person. If you save one person's life, if you really deeply impact one person's life, is that not a worthy form of expression? Is that not enough? And I think especially on social media, that can be a powerful motivator for me because I often get very frustrated with that medium, but thinking to myself, if this truly helps one person, let that be the motivator. If this truly helps one person, great. I'm so glad I did it. And so I would ask you to take a look at expectations in that because I've played that game and it is not satisfying to be looking for more and more and more.
Yeah.
Ken, one of the things that's coming up for me is that you're here right now talking, and although your camera's off, you have the same, everyone hears your voice the same as everyone else's on the panel. So in terms of that story, because what I heard, someone mentioned in the comments about narrative therapy, and I've read a lot on this, and it's a lot of the work I did is what is the narrative? What happened? And I just wonder if this does anything, if I pose that question to you, if this does anything to change that narrative where you express something, and I don't know if this is common for you or not common for you, but for me, it's, I like the serendipity of it where you expressed this, I don't have a right to, you guys do, and suddenly you're right here with us, right? And I don't know if that's the first time that's happened, but for me, magic happens when we express ourselves. And I don't know if you want to turn on your camera or don't want to turn on your camera, but for now, your voice is heard just as much as all of ours, simply because you took that little step of expressing yourself. And I think certainly me, and I don't know for the other panels, certainly me, this wasn't who I was. I was voted in high school the least likely person to do a TED Talk. Not actually, but I definitely would have been, because I wasn't comfortable speaking in front of 4 or 5 people. And eventually I got that courage, and I expressed something once, which led to a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth. And one of the things, I like what Elad said about anger and coming out. One of the things that led to the TED Talk actually was, and I'll call Rosh out here now. Rosh helps a lot of people with stories. And he came into my company, and he was helping a number of us prepare for an event where we're going to tell our stories. And I said, I want to talk about my porn addiction. And Rosh was like, no way. And it made me angry. I don't know any other word. It made me angry. Like, what do you mean? Like, my story is not good enough? Like, Rosh, if someone says they have cancer, they can talk about that. If someone says they went to prison 4 times because of mistakes they made, they can talk about that. They can talk about drug addiction. But suddenly I can't talk about porn addiction. Like, my story can't be shared. And I was angry at Rosh, and I was angry at the message that he was putting out there that I knew wasn't only his. And that anger is some of what was channeled into that talk. So if you can unmute yourself, I'm just wondering what this is doing for you in terms of being on this, sharing that, getting the feedback you are, and if you figured out what's going to be on that billboard next to your pretty face.
You can't unmute himself.
It's a hilarious feature of these Zooms. I had the same problem
Okay.
there.
Oh, now I lost my train of thought. But you know, I think that's really, I think anger is really something that needs to be explored. And for example, I think anger has been my go-to emotion for most of my life. When I was very small, I was very angry and really not sure why. And I've always felt really quite angry, whether I was able to express it or not. And I think a lot of it goes back to this struggle to be accepted and to be heard. And I think because of my sexual orientation and a lot of things, it's like I just wasn't okay. I wasn't accepted. At least I didn't feel accepted, and I didn't fit. And, you know, it just could go on and on and on in those kind of ways. And when you just don't fit and you're just not okay and you're just not right, basically, I think that births a lot of anger.
All right, Ken, you know what I want to do here for a second? If you can give me like a minute and kind of try to be open with me, all right? If you can be an open vessel, I think you can get some value in the next 2 minutes. You ready? Ready?
Yes.
Okay. How does an actor standing on stage connect with an audience? What tools does an actor use? Think about your favorite performer. What tool does your favorite performer use to connect with an audience?
Emotion, words.
Emotion. So emotion is your most valuable connective device, right? And we know that from thousands of years ago. Aristotle came up with the art of persuasion, where he talks about that you need 3 things to persuade an audience. You need ethos, pathos, and logos. You need character, emotion, and facts. Here's what you're missing from your story, Ken. I don't know you, so we got to get to know you, right? The emotion of your story is quite clear, right? What would be your emotional tone in your story?
Frustration, anger, anxiety.
But I don't know you. So what you're missing here is you're missing the ethos part of it, is who is Kent? Who is the person behind that screen right there, right? Once you're able to do that, then you're able to connect with me as an audience member. So let's try to get to know who you are for a quick second, okay? Let's go back to your message again. What is your message, Kent?
Well, so you said my message was essence over packaging.
Let's make that a little bit more, what's an example of a good message? I know this will get a lot. What's an example of a good message? Good messaging. Don't throw anything at me, but good messaging. Yes, you can, right? Just do it. Make America great again, right?
You just made me barf.
Okay, you understand what I'm saying, right? Simple, to the point. What's your
Slogans.
message?
But also, this is the very dance he's fighting against too, which I recognize, right? Like we're talking about how to spruce up his package and how to take the essence of his message and make it go. And so, like, I just want to, it needs to happen. This is the dance, but I want to acknowledge that that's also the process that
Right,
we're
but
standing inside of.
So maybe essence is the message. Essence is the message.
Essence. Let's get back to essence, right?
I like the word essence.
Let's get back to essence. Now, if you come over to me, Kent, and you say, let's get back to essence, guess what the first thing I'm going to say to you is? Who the hell are you to tell me that? So you got to tell me a little bit about who you are. Things like, where'd you grow up? What were your parents like? What was the first obstacle that you faced in your life? How did you overcome that obstacle? What did you realize about that obstacle? Now, I will let you in on a little secret here, Ken. Audiences learn through struggle. When you can bring me to the point in your life where you recognized how important essence was, the struggle, then you can bring me to realization. Can you bring me to that moment when you recognized how important essence was? How it was more important than anything else, more important than money, more important than a job. When did you realize that? What was your lowest point?
My lowest point. I don't know.
When you can express that, because you know what it is, you're just not ready to express it yet. When you can express that and you can find the good in it, and you can say, you know what, I recognize that essence is more important than anything else. Being true to yourself is more important than anything else. That's when you'll begin to grow and be happy. You do know when that moment was, Ken. I'm going to challenge you on that.
When was yours?
Oh, touche.
Because I'm really not quite sure what you're going after.
Oh, every story arc, right, has conflict to it. It has that moment where you go through the difficulty and it changes you. Max has that moment, guaranteed. Ellie for sure had that moment. I've had that moment.
So when was yours, Rosh? I know it because knowing Rosh, I've heard the story on the football field a number of times.
No. I think it was when my parents got divorced when I was 13 years old. And the story on the football field, being bullied, came after that. But I think my parents' divorce was one of those moments where the conflict became real. And I learned a lot from that. But we all have that moment where we have to really think. Like Max, here's an example. Let me get to Max for a second, because I'm sure Max has that moment too. Like, what makes you an artist? The struggle makes you that artist, correct?
Sometimes when you phrase that question of it's just the heartbreaks are the first thing that come up for me. That's like the time to reorient the whole life, like crash and rebuild moments. Those are the ones that.
And I think for many of us now, we're collectively going through a moment like that. But those moments can be real gifts if you learn something from it. So Ken, what was your moment?
See, again, I mean, there's but I don't know that this answers the question, but there was I'm fairly small-boned person, was quite small, went to a two-room church school, usually was picked last in sports teams, basically have a lot of baggage around that. One of my teachers in 5th grade, he was really into running and playing soccer. Couple of moments I distinctly remember was going for the ball. I was in 5th grade. I think the other kid was a black kid. He was a 2nd grader, and he was about twice my size. And we hit, and I ended up having my breath knocked out of me. And another thing I remember was we all went on a foot race, basically. And the teacher basically told me, if you'll just keep up with those guys, the biggest guys, just not let them get ahead of you, that he basically told me what to do to be able to win the race. So I was in 5th grade, I believe, and I actually I ran and won the race of the entire school, even against the 8th graders. Now, those are a couple of things that pop into my mind. I don't know that those are low points necessarily.
But they kind of define who you are, right?
Not necessarily, but there's those snapshots that, why do we remember? Why do we have these mental snapshots that we have? And those are a couple things from elementary school, which basically I despised elementary school.
Right. So you've always been looking for recognition.
Yeah,
right?
probably. Yeah, I think most of us are, and I think a lot of it was because, again, I think underlying this sense of not really fitting and not being acceptable, which.
So there we go. So you just said that you went to a church school, right?
Right.
Did they accept you? Did they accept the real you?
No, I don't think so.
Kind of
And
like,
well, actually, funny enough, I think in a sense, I think it goes both ways. I don't think I really accepted, I think there was a lot of Pharisaism going on in a sense. My family was, in a sense, more conservative and better than, I thought of myself as better than a lot of other people. And I think not fitting had a positive and a negative side to it.
right. So life begins when you accept yourself, right? Isn't that what you're saying tonight, Kent?
And that's very difficult to do.
No, it's not. You know how it begins? Can you say it, that I accept myself?
I can say it. I don't know if I could mean it.
Oh, wait. Okay, so you're on the stage of the Gershwin Theater. Here are the lights. Ready? Seriously, I want Ken to stand up. You can't turn your camera on?
No.
Oh, okay. I want you to say, I accept myself.
I accept myself.
When you say you can't turn your camera on, it means you don't want to, or you don't have that option?
Yes, I do not want to for certain reasons.
No, that's
fine. So we finally, but you see here how we finally got to, it took us a little while, but really at the end of this, what this is saying, what you're really saying, and what a beautiful speech that would be about the journey to self-acceptance. I would love to personally hear that speech because I'm still trying to accept myself. Honestly.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, that's a huge.
You know what's so funny,
huge
Ken?
thing.
I always say that speaking is the great equalizer. And the reason I say that is that you could have a ton of money and be really good looking. And if you can't speak, it's meaningless. Because there could be somebody in the corner of the room that doesn't have a lot of money and is not that good looking and could capture that room. And the guy with a lot of money who's really good looking would be envious, right? Speaking is power. And so if you really worked on this speech, look at this, 10 minutes ago, and I'm sorry we took up some time here, but 10 minutes ago, you said, I don't know what my passion is. And all you guys are, you're famous and you do TED Talks. And 10 minutes later, all of a sudden you take me back to your school and you say, I just want to be accepted for who I am. That's all I want. And now I'm going to take you on my journey to where at the end of my speech, I'll be able to reframe my story and find that self-acceptance. Kent?
Yeah.
That's it.
Kent, you know what I'm thinking is
That's it.
similar to what Max said, is that, you know, when you express that anger, the chance that you're the only one on this panel or the only one watching this in the future that felt that feeling is almost none.
Yeah.
And, you know, whatever I may look like or whatever perception people have of me, the narrative that I went through adolescence and into adulthood was the two most prominent beliefs. 3, say no one would accept me as I am weak, and I am disgusting, right? Those are probably the 3 deepest held beliefs inside of me. And that feeling of not belonging was prominent, and only to find out when I started talking about it, how many people felt like they didn't belong. So you have a room full of 50 people, and there may be 4 that feel like they belong, and the 46 like they have more belonging than the 4, because that feeling of not belonging is a lot more consistent than the feeling of belonging, and that your story is unique, but it also has a lot of similarities to many other people who can benefit tremendously from hearing what you have to say, all aspects of it, right? So one person may cling on to the you said you were smaller as a 5th grader than a 2nd grader, and that may be one person's. They'll connect to that. Another person may connect to this general sense of not feeling acceptance or recognized or noticed. But inevitably, when we share our story, there are 8 billion people, but there are not 8 billion unique stories. And the stories, and the harder they are to say, the more people will find who will be impacted by it. And you see in the messages, someone messaged it only to all panelists. I don't think he meant to say that. But as he wrote, "Can't I relate? 2 years of therapy and still in progress." And I think if people can put into the notes over here how many people, and if you can make sure it says all panelists and attendees, when hearing Kent's story, does just a little bit of it, what does that do for them? Does it resonate? Does it not resonate? And be specific if you can, what aspects of what someone may have heard.
It's pretty amazing, Kent.
But yeah, I think you're right. You know, there's the battle. I think maybe, I suppose, especially for those of us that are dealing with addiction, you know, really that struggle to accept ourselves, really. I mean, I think that's huge in addiction, and feeling like, you know, baseline, we're just not okay. And so it's very hard to feel accepted by others and also accept ourselves.
Absolutely.
And, you know, and even, you know, I go to a bunch of online drop-in groups, and even there, I don't feel like I fit.
Kent, I want to step in. Someone said, I relate to the part about not being sure what your message is. Like, even that is expression. Saying, I don't know what to say. And it's sometimes the most powerful parts. We did a webinar a few weeks ago called Facing the Unknown. And just that, that was the idea of being in those spaces of not knowing, and how vulnerable, honest it is to just say, I don't know, right? When Rosh asks, you see your face on a billboard, and that is the most true response right there. And a lot of people feel that as well, is I don't know.
Yeah.
I've been on this planet for 50 years and I have no idea what the hell I want people to know. And right after that admission comes the possibility of finding it, which I think there was some exploration here, and it could go even beyond that to find what that, if you were on the Gershwin Theater, if you did have that, the microphone that a ton of people would be able to listen, or just that one person, whatever it is, what is it that you would say? What is that speech that you would give? And I think finding that is It's an amazing process. And the journey of expressing it each step of the way, I don't know. And maybe it's this, maybe it's that. You'll find a lot of people who not only resonate with what you're saying, but benefit tremendously from it. And that's what has me talking. It's that feeling. I'll share one message here, and I think you'll resonate with this. You said you're in recovery for porn addiction. I got this message from yesterday from someone on Instagram. I have no idea who they are. Don't know if I'll ever talk to them or see them. It said, "Hey, Ellie, I'm a university student. I've been struggling with porn for almost 8 years. I have no one to share my story with. And also when the opportunity presents itself, I feel so ashamed of myself. I'm really yearning to stop. Every time I try, I fail. I recently saw your video on TED. I would love us to have to get into conversation. Thanks." And these messages, I think about where I was, Kent, and I really want to impart that on you, is that place where you were at the beginning of this call, and you sound a lot lighter now, but that place where you were, that anger and frustration, that's where I was when Rosh told me, don't share your story about porn addiction from there. And what it buried a little bit of shame in me, and I'm not blaming Rosh. Rosh was trying to protect me from what he knew could inevitably come from sharing. It was a risky thing to do, to talk about a porn addiction from that setting. And Rosh is like, "Ellie, you can share a bunch of stories. This may be a little bit too far." And man, I'm so glad I did. Not for the 1.4 million views, but for this message that I got, like to the point that Max was saying, the 1.4, I see someone else with 20 and I want to know why I don't have that. But this one message fills that hole of feeling different, that hole of feeling ashamed, that hole of feeling punished by the world for this. Addiction is not a small word. Addiction is, I felt like I completely couldn't control my behavior. I've smashed laptops. I've thrown them down garbage chutes so that I don't use this. I put locks on my phone. I've done whatever I could to do this. And when I get these messages, it validates those years of struggling to figure it out, because I thought I was the only person who was experiencing such difficulty watching porn or stopping porn. I thought I was the only one watching and the only one experiencing such difficulty stopping. And as soon as I spoke about it, hell, we're on this call possibly because of that, because you heard me talk about porn addiction and that's what connected to you. So I really want to honor what you've done by agreeing to jump on this call. And I hope you continue, and I hope you share that message, because not to put guilt on you, but you'd be robbing the world of a beautiful gift if you did not share your story.
Well, thanks for letting me be on the call. It's been fun to talk to you guys and fun to hear you.
And be sure you read the chat if you haven't yet, just because there are some things in there that are for you to see.
A lot of people are messaging to all panelists. Please do all panelists and attendees, because Kent is not seeing those messages. If your message is to all panelists, but there's some beautiful messages coming in. Sarah Walsh said, "Your courage in speaking up and going through the process with Rosh helps me to know that I matter and that the search for my mission is not something that will take a lifetime to discover." I'm saying these are beautiful things. And I said, please, Ken, take heart, truly take your message forward. And you're seeing some in the attendee section, but some are going only to panelists. For those who did, if you could, for the benefit of Kent, so he knows what that was like for you guys hearing it, just copy it and put it to all panelists and attendees. You'll see it when you're putting in the chat. You have different sections. So Kent, thanks so much. I feel like you made my evening, and I feel like you made it for all of us. And it started with an expression of anger, and I love that, because I agree with Elad. There's a lot. Anger is a powerful pathway, and it's not meant to be ignored. It's meant to be channeled powerfully and beautifully, and I think you demonstrated that tonight, so thank you.
Is there a way to save the chat, actually?
If you shoot me an email at the end of this, I'll be able to, I think Zoom records it, and I'll be able to get you the chat.
Because I'd appreciate that. Yeah,
That's awesome.
It is pretty incredible. I know on many Zoom meetings, you can actually, attendees can actually save the chat, but I suppose it depends on how you have it set up. Anyway.
Thanks again, Kent.
Do all four of you, well, I guess this is about up, right?
Say again?
I was just interested to know if you all actually really are convinced of what your, in like one short phrase, what your passion is and how you figured that out, or have you already always known it?
I don't think I can speak for me. I don't think it's a one and done. There are many things I'm passionate about, but there's definitely a certain theme in my own, and that's removing shame, giving people a voice, removing shame and the things that shame blocks people from. If there's one headline, it's I take more pride in that than anything else. Is could we remove shame in the world? So many of us are walking around with it. So many of us that seem the least obvious to have it. That's the drive. I felt weak. I said that was one of my messages, and I hit the gym like crazy. That was a huge part of it. And maybe someone saw someone large, but that wasn't what I felt like inside. There was shame driving those behaviors. And I wish I get another motivation to hit the gym now. So other than shame, but that's a different conversation for a different time.
We're all going through that.
Different conversation for a different time. But that's, if I summed it up, that would be one, but there's so many different ways that express it. I'd love if others answer that. And I think we can wrap up on that note. Elad, is there a certain mission to your work and a theme, a connective theme between everything? Is there a billboard with Elad's face on it that says a beautiful message?
There might be. I hope there is. I think there is, but I think it was weird. I had this image literally right before this chat, and it had nothing to do with the chat, but it kind of got stuck in my head, which was of like a snake or a reptile, like how they let go of old skin and then kind of enter this like newer, cleaner form of themselves. And the reason I say that is because I think there's been a lot of times where I thought I knew the essence of my message. And in many ways, I think I still connect to a lot of the stuff that I thought I had connected to. And I think the reason I love that image is it's kind of an image that goes both ways, where there's always the detritus, like the stuff you have to get rid of, the stuff that you have to let go of, that you thought was you thought was the essence of who you are. But underneath that, there still is an essence. There is still something even deeper that's going on. And so I'm sorry to give a non-answer to the answer, but I think the reason that I'm saying that is because maybe this would be part of the consistency of it, is that I've felt anytime when I've tried too hard to say, this is what I am, I've gotten myself into trouble. And whenever I've allowed myself to say, that's what I was, this is what I am at the moment, this is where I'm going, that kind of thought.
Would you say it's more of this is where I am versus this is what I am?
Maybe, yeah. That would be really good. Yeah. I think whenever it's like phrased as a process, I find that to be for me, very powerful, because I think that, I just, and I guess that's why, again, I identify so much with Kent. Kent, I don't know, I feel like a soul brother, but I really do, because I think, there are moments in my life where I thought everything was clicking, and there are now, I'd say, 6 months ago, I was very angry at the world, and, a month ago I started, and I think the point is that we're all going through these like journeys, and when we honor each piece of that journey, we see like that this mission in this moment, this mission in that moment are powerful, then we can really grow, I think. So I'm sorry to not at all answer the question, but
that is it, right? That is the answer. That resonates deeply with me, is that there are things that felt so right for a period of time. When I was doing the work, for example, with Jewish Community Watch, combating child sex abuse, for a few years, it felt so right. And then it stopped feeling right. And I said, I think my message is bigger than abuse victims. And I felt like there was a part of my message that was coming across like child abuse as some sort of monopoly on pain. And that's certainly not what I believe. I was hearing it from the place of, this is my experience. Yesterday, someone reached out to me and said they're really struggling. And they said, but I didn't have a childhood like yours. I feel like a guy with a broken arm talking to a double amputee. I was like, that's not my message at all, just the opposite. I love what Viktor Frankl says in Man's Search for Meaning. He said, pain is like a gas. It fills up all available resources. Who the hell cares where that pain came from? And sometimes the pain of it sometimes when the abuse or the pain is a little bit more covert, it's more painful because then there's confusion versus it's like freaking obvious. There's an amputee. This is my pain. And then other times there's this existential angst that just bugs us and we don't have a clear hook to hang this reason we feel this way on. And that becomes its own pain, right? Versus someone who does have, oh, I went through this experience as a child and maybe that's why I feel that way. So pain is pain. And that's a real part of my message, and the way it transforms and changes and feels right and then stops feeling right. And then that becomes a call to go further and do more and speak more. And one thing for sure, and I hope this is coming clear, when I'm doing these webinars, it's not coming from a place of I've found something, let me give it to you. It's I'm searching for something and let me turn the lights on while I'm searching. And it's that's the energy and the place that I'm trying to come from. Even in terms of words at healing, I've found some things that are true for me, but I've written a lot and I still don't feel like I'm completely healed. So it's not this panacea, oh, you just write and you're better, or you just speak and you're better. I mean, that's not the case, but it's something that had I not had I not developed, I wouldn't feel like myself. Max, your thoughts?
I mean, yes, I hear you say that too. It's like also, then I'm better. Some later future state of better where it's all perfect and groovy all the time, we're never getting there. It's like versus understanding that we're in the process and accepting without shame of like, this is where I am and I'm walking forward. And I think we are all in that. Like the deepest truth that I have found is that one is like, there's no final destination. We're in it. We're living it. We are in the process and it's okay. And wherever we are, it's okay. And God loves us where we're at and is us where we're at and all of that. Of like, in terms of one message, I think it's helpful. Can't I really relate to yours of like essence over packaging and really getting to the truth deeper than honesty, truth. But like, for me, I don't have one message. I relate to what you said a lot. And I think like honing in on this is my thing can be helpful when you're building something, like whether that's a business or a platform. But also we very quickly start to get into that starts to define us, right? That becomes our identity. It's like, no, it latches on as opposed to being the infinite that we are. And so I think I love what you said, Eli, about where am I? And what am I passionate about right now? What's am I feeling really driven to and called towards right now? And hell yeah, let's follow that. Let's run towards that and let's build things around it. But I don't feel like I have one for me that goes on a billboard or a tattoo on my body. And it feels changing. And right now about helping people see the God in themselves and see and come alive, get to that essence, feel the fullness and be the aliveness inside of us. That's what I'm feeling called to right now.
I just saw this comment that just reminded me of something that I was really excited about, which was someone just said, my takeaway from this is that I should journal every day. And I was like, yes, the moment I saw that, and this was like a second ago. There's people celebrating a birthday. Can you hear that outside?
A little bit, but it's okay.
You can hear me? Okay. So it's pandemic living. So I was really excited about that because one of the things that we forget very often, like there was a lot of, I heard, especially from Kent State, Dr. Kent State, that, like a lot about audience and about like who has an audience and who not. And then there was Max who said like, what if you affect one person? And I so resonated with that. And then, I was thinking about that, and what the journal thing kind of brought me back to is, what if that one person is you? What if at the end of the day, like you actually don't affect anyone? Let's say you put something out there. I wrote a piece recently that I was like shy. Oh my gosh, I got no share. But I realized that the piece itself was like incredibly essential to me in my process, in myself and my growth, not to mention journaling. I would say journaling is something that has grown me as a person, maybe more than my public writing. And you know, there's Brenda Euland, who was an incredible writer about writing. She wrote a book, If You Want to Write. She quoted Byron quite a bit, and she spoke about his biography quite a bit. He was a famous poet. And she said that he would burn his poetry, like, I think probably like 75 of his poems, like percent of his poems, we have no idea what they were. And he did it because he was trying to remind himself that he was doing it, number one, like there was a number of reasons, but I think the main thing was that he was trying to remind himself that this was like a divine act, and that what he was doing was something very deep and it mattered more than the audience, or than him having an audience, I should say. Not more than the audience, but more than his feelings about an audience. And I was always really moved by that. So
I would second that. I've been journaling since I came into recovery, and I use the same app since then. It's called my W Days, W for Wonderful. And sometimes often when I'm feeling a little out of sorts, I'll go back to my early journals just to remind myself of the progress. And I see who I was, what I was struggling with, what was going on at 7-8 years ago when I started this process. And it's extremely powerful. And really when we're talking about that, words that heal, and it was some of the things that I asked Rosh and Max, separating the expression and the constructing of the writing from the outward expression beyond oneself. So I like what Elad said in terms of maybe that person is oneself. Just this book that I was reading, which I'll put in the messages here, the expressive writing that heals. So it mentions 4 different components, and then it gives a specific exercise that they find works for most people most of the time. But it recommends with something like this to try a bunch of different things and see what does work. And you've heard from 3 people, or I would even include myself, who use expression a lot, that we all use it slightly differently. So figuring out what fits best. But the 4 things that they found help people heal through writing is when there was open acknowledgement of emotions. So it's not writing about ideas, but how was I feeling? It's not even writing about the story as much. What did it make me feel? The second was to construct a story, a beginning, middle, and an end, versus this happened to me. This happened to me, and this was realization, and therefore that happened. And there are many different ways to construct a story, but when it's written out as an actual beginning, middle, and end story, it has a powerful therapeutic effect. A third, which was very interesting, I've never tried this, but writing from alternative perspectives. And I've tried this there's a Byron Katie, I don't know if any of you have come across her work, The Work by Byron Katie, she calls it. But often what she does is when someone has a belief, she'll say, give me the opposite of that belief, and then tell me how it's true. And what she's trying to do in those settings is just say, okay, that's one version, but how is this equally true, right? An example is, my son should call me, right? If my mom is listening in, my son should call me. Well, how is the opposite true, right? And what's the opposite of my son should call me? I should call my son. How is that true? How is my son shouldn't call me? How is that true, right? And what she does in the therapy and the work process with people is try on alternative thoughts. I've never used it myself in writing, but I found it interesting that it mentioned that as something that, Kent, when you were talking about the alternative perspective, an alternative perspective is you shared certain things maybe as negative experiences. How can they be positive experiences? There was a certain narrative that wasn't the facts of what was happening, right? There was there was the fact that happened, and then there was the feeling. Then there was the stuff surrounding it, which is the narrative that you take on, and how can a different narrative be explored? And then the fourth was writing in one's own voice, finding one's voice, right? And those 4 elements. And the exercise that it gave is to write 4 days in a row for 20 minutes a day. And after doing the writing, and it's a minimum, not a maximum, after doing the writing is to reflect on the writing. Right, so I've gone through this process and then spend a few minutes saying, what did that feel like for me? How has it changed? And what it says in the studies is that for the first hour or 2 afterwards, people often feel more of whatever emotion came up, either anger, either sad, depressed, whatever it is. But then months afterwards, they're reporting better results from this. So just if someone wants specific exercise, I think Max, my sense is, Elad, you don't offer any specific, you don't help others write. You just, this is what you do for yourself,
No.
right? Max and Raj both lead webinars and groups and things like that.
I do as well. The main thing that I do kind of a few things. One is a retreat I do once a year, which is like it's called using fear to access your creativity, or
Cool.
confronting fear to access your creativity. And it's actually very similar to, like, you know, some of the stuff that was discussed here, which is like kind of facing yourself and that sort of thing in a safe place. And then, you know, I try to also do, and I've done classes, but I also try to do these things called creative Verbringings, which I'm hoping to do online at some point, which is like what Max was talking about, just like creating a space where people are just sharing the raw thing that they happen to have in the moment that's unfinished or unpolished. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go on, but yeah, I do love doing stuff like that as well.
So if there's a way people can, you know, a website you have or something, if you can put it in the notes, and Max, I think some people ask for your email, and Rosh as well. So if you just put it to all panelists and attendees, so if they want to reach out to you or a website that they can contact, I think would be super helpful, because it seems to me from the comments that we've definitely inspired people. So I hope that some of us have somewhere to channel. I know Max and Rosh does some ways to channel that inspiration, whether they want to do something
I'll
with
put
it.
that
I
in
hope
the,
people do.
I think
I'll put
there's,
that in now.
you know, Max, I'm fascinated that you said that you don't have a message.
I might need you to help me find mine.
I'm gonna challenge you on that, because I believe that you do.
Do you know what it is?
We could get there. Usually a passion, or like that tie, and I've seen this, like, for example, if someone says, I'm passionate about money, usually they grew up without it. If someone says, I'm passionate about helping others, usually they didn't get the help. Right? Most artists are passionate about that because they didn't get that somewhere along the line. And when you begin to really explore that, I think it'll make your art that much deeper. You know, one of my favorite, and I use this line a lot, but I love it so much, is George Seurat, Sunday in the Park with George, the artist Sondheim wrote about, saying, you know, the show ends with Seurat at 38 years old saying, blank a white page or canvas, his favorite, so many possibilities. And I really believe that this is where we're sitting today as a society, that there are so many possibilities. And especially, you know, Max, and I know your work, I respect your work. I think that if you got to the core of what is my message, like allowed yourself to get there, it could
It's also
be
I'm
You know what I feel like,
always
Max,
open.
when you, like the,
Sorry, let me quickly say,
Go
I'm
ahead.
curious though, like, is your message today the same as it was 5 years ago?
not necessarily.
So
But
like,
in order to connect with an audience, right? If Steve Jobs walked in the room right now, would you know what his message was?
be like, I'm back from the dead.
No. But you understand my point. His message was always consistent. Of being a visionary.
He had a brand.
Stay hungry, stay foolish.
I mean,
That was Steve Jobs.
embrace difference,
Yes.
challenge
different,
norms.
stay hungry, stay foolish. But
Yes.
we got a lot of messages, right?
But they all tied into the same thing about him being a visionary. Otherwise, you're all over the place.
He definitely had a consistent brand.
Yes.
Max, I tell you what I feel from you. Like when we interact in this panel, is there's this part of you that's screaming without saying it. I'm alive. We're alive. Damn it. Right? Like something like
I
that.
love
That's what I
that.
feel.
I love that. It's true.
I want to know what it was like having John Stossel as a dad.
We can do another webinar on that one.
Yeah, this is taking up a lot of data on Zoom and Zoom and later on YouTube. So Rosh, your message. I know you love helping others, but let's see if you can help yourself.
What is my own personal message?
Mm-hmm. driving down the I-95. There's a billboard. Rosh Lowe. What does it say?
It has to do with something with being suffocated. Don't allow yourself to be suffocated. And the word when I
Take the negative out of it.
when I
Go ahead. Can't say it. I love this.
Take the negative out of it. When I use the word suffocated, there's many ways that we suffocate ourselves. Like we suffocate ourselves with insecurity. We suffocate
Suffocation.
Escape suffocation, yeah. We suffocate ourselves with addiction for sure. We suffocate ourselves with kind of living by old mantras. And
Judgment of others.
Judgment of others.
Yeah.
And so I want to be able to breathe.
There we go.
And part of breathing for me is definitely helping others. I think that that's a big part of it. But I think that it's so interesting that like Corona affects like the lungs. Like I've been thinking a lot about breathing every day, and meditation is very important. But I just want to breathe, and my breath comes not only from my own peace of mind, but definitely at the end of the day, when I can really, and I really mean this. This is not like bullshit. When I feel like I've helped somebody, I breathe better. Like it makes me feel like good. And when I have those days where I'm not really helping a whole lot of people, that's when the thoughts of like, damn, I can't believe they've closed the casinos come in. You know?
No, absolutely. As an educator, my absolute favorite thing. I mean, I taught one-on-one, but I also taught classroom, stuff. But still, to me, the one-on-one where you could really get inside that person's head in a sense and really see the light bulb turn on and really make it, walk them through a process that brings them success and them to come back and say, you really helped me achieve this. That's just magic.
Yeah.
That's the main point. I was a little bit in my head when I started this because we had communicated 2 different times to people, and it seems like a lot of people thought it was happening earlier. And when I was seeing the numbers of people signing in, it was a lot lower than I had anticipated. And I started a little bit in my head, and then through the process to get to that is that it doesn't matter. This was so impactful for me, and I think for others. This, Elad used the word for bringing, and that's what I feel like it was. I feel like it allowed me to open up and have a conversation with others, and feel like we're connecting in some way. How cool! It's on Zoom. You can't see most of the people, but I feel much more connected after this, and I'm paying less attention to that, to the number and that thought. So it's just funny how the conversation came full circle, because I started off this conversation totally in my head about it, and exactly what you said, Kent. It's, yeah, you're a professor and everything else, but it's when that one, and speaking to a room full of people, but it's when that one light bulb goes off in one person's head, and it's like, boom, I did something meaningful today. And you can't turn on 100 at a time. That's not the way it works. And if you do, you don't know it. It's that one. It's that one-on-one. And I feel like I've connected one-on-one with a lot of people tonight. I feel a hell of a lot better. And thanks so much. Thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks, Rosh. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Elad. Thanks, Kent.
Thanks, Kent.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Beautiful.
Appreciate it.
The way you stepped up, I mean, that's it. That's everything to me. You turn it on. You spoke exactly from where you're at. I think you made the evening for me, and I think you made this webinar for me, and I think for everyone else as well.
For me,
Thanks for taking the plunge.
For me, the most impactful thing tonight was to hear that shift, Ken, from anger. Because a lot of people I work with, I get that anger at first. So like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And then boom, there's like this shift, right? And it's in that shift where I think progress can come. I came up with my message, by the way. Let me help you breathe so I can.
Ooh. Thanks, Rush.
All right. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure. And I love your work, Max. I love your work, Elad. I think you're both geniuses. I've read a lot of your stuff. Seriously, Max, I love, I've been following you since Jewish Community Watch. You have you have such an incredible talent. And Elad, I follow you religiously, and
Don't use the word religious around Elad.
That's fine.
I kidding.
The platforms that you have built.
It brings up trauma for me also.
I just wanted to say that. It's been an honor being on this with you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. This was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good
Not
night.
at all.
Good night.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you all. Good night. Thank you for having us.